And thank you, and I thank the chairman and yield back.
Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you. I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms.
Gentlelady from California.
Lee.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank Chairman McCann and also our ranking member Smith for agreeing to include my amendment in this en bloc amendment for consideration. I urge support for these en bloc amendments, and specifically for my amendment 117, which prohibits funding to construct military bases, permanent military bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've consistently and we have successfully worked to include this prohibition of funding for permanent bases in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. Due to our efforts and support of all of our colleagues here on a bipartisan basis who understand the importance of prohibiting permanent bases in these countries, this language has historically been included in the defense authorization and appropriations bills and signed into law by President Bush and President Obama. In fact, in working with our colleagues, we were successful in placing the same language in the continuing resolution which was passed by the House and signed into law by President Obama in April of 2011. By ensuring that this language is included yet again, and may I have an additional minute?
I would yield an additional minute.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. By once again including it in this bill, we are absolutely being clear that the policy of the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq has never included permanent bases and will never include permanent bases. However, I'm disappointed that we didn't go one step further today by considering my amendment to begin a sizable and significant reduction of our armed forces beginning this July so that we can begin to end the longest war in American history. But I'm urging our colleagues to support the amendment prohibiting permanent military bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's critical in fighting the perception held by many in Iraq and Afghanistan that we are an occupying army or that we intend to remain as an occupying force. That perception fuels the insurgents and the Taliban and makes our troops more vulnerable and further threatens our national security. So I want to thank the chairman again and our ranking member for the time and for including this amendment in the en bloc package of amendments. Thank you.
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Kingston.
Gentleman from Georgia.
I thank the gentleman from California for the time, and I stand in support of the amendment and the passage of the bill. But I want to raise a point which has a great concern to me as an appropriator and as a fiscal conservative, and that is the Pentagon's practice, and it's been practiced by the Obama administration and as it was by the Bush administration, of putting the war on terrorism money for Afghanistan and Iraq and other places around the globe off the military budget. We are debating a budget today which is about $550 billion, but there's another $120 billion which goes under overseas contingency operations, which we do not debate or scrutinize nearly as much as we should. And what that money does is actually brings us to a military spending bill that's not in the 500 billions, but is $670 billion. A lot of that money is going to not emergency spending, but ongoing operations. Did anybody last year think we were going to be out of Afghanistan or Iraq this year? No. That money should be in their base budget. As a member of the Defense Appropriations Committee, I have submitted language on our bill to straighten this out, and I hope that Congress will take a look at it down the road. I do support this amendment, however, and I thank the gentleman from California for the time.
Gentleman from Washington.
I reserve.
Gentleman from California. Mr. McKeon. Gentleman from California.
I reserve my balance.
Well, everybody's reserved.
We have one number of speakers. I'm prepared to yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman from California.
I ask my colleagues to support these amendments and yield back the balance of my time.
Question is on the en bloc amendments offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to H. Res. 276, I offer amendments en bloc.
The clerk will designate the amendments en bloc.
Amendments en bloc number 5, consisting of amendments numbered 127, 128, 129, 130, 131, 132, 133, 135, 136, 137, 138, 139, 140, 142, 46, 143, 144, 145, 147, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. McKeon of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276, the gentleman from California, Mr. McKeon, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith, each will control 10 minutes, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will state his inquiry.
Was number 146 included in that block?
Clerk will designate 146.
146.
Now it has. Gentleman from California.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I urge the committee to adopt the amendments in block, all of which have been examined by both the majority and the minority.
And you reserve your time?
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce.
Gentleman from New Mexico.
Thank you, gentleman from California. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of my revised amendment number 144, which will address concerns I have regarding the DoD contract bundling process. The current DoD process encourages wrapping together of proposals for projects for bid proposals. This process unfairly distributes DoD resources and often allows outside companies to get contracts on bases where local businesses have better regional and technical knowledge to perform the service. The winning bidder then subcontracts with the local businesses, often underfunding the subcontractor and pocketing the rest. The local company and the state where the base is housed lose out on significant revenue and job opportunities. An example of this was recently in my district. A man that makes radios and antennas who's called by DoD, asked if he could make a radio antenna that would fit in the pocket like a cigarette package. While they were speaking on the phone, he actually built one of these. The DoD contractor asked him how much it would be. He said somewhere between $1.50 and $3. DoD said the lowest bid they had for the same antenna was over $150,000. We run into this all of the time. At a time when we have deficits soaring, I think it's time for us to spend our money wisely and efficiently and use local contractors and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment, which incorporates 4 of my amendments as part of the en bloc, and I want to therefore thank Chairman McCain and Ranking Member Smith for the bipartisan approach in which they have dealt with these amendments today. One of my amendments officially recognizes Salem, Massachusetts as the birthplace of the National Guard. Salem was the site where the country's first military regiment mustered in 1637. The militia was the foundation of what would become the National Guard. It's in commemoration and celebration of the men and women who serve our country and those Salem residents who came together almost 375 years ago to protect our nation that I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Next year will be the 375th anniversary of the first muster, and so it's particularly pleasing to see this matter passed in time to celebrate that. And in my limited time, I also want to touch on the other 3 amendments that are included in the en bloc. Those are good government amendments, which were the result of oversight work done by the Subcommittee on National Security, which I chaired in the last 2 Congresses, but which reflect a good bipartisan oversight effort. These amendments will be seeking to strengthen our manufacturing and defense industrial base. We'll be increasing coordination of foreign police training programs, which currently involve efforts by no less than 7 different United States governmental departments and agencies, and we'll be creating a new leadership position within the Pentagon to ensure appropriate oversight on wartime contracting. So at a time when every line item in the budget is being scrutinized, these amendments are intended to make our country stronger, to make systems work better, and to make sure taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. And with that, I thank my colleagues and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
Gentlelady from New York.
I thank the ranking member for his leadership and for yielding, and I thank him and Chairman McKeon for the bipartisan approach of including amendments in the en bloc, and I thank you for including my amendment in en bloc number 4. And my amendment would narrow an overly broad exemption under FOIA We must protect certain critical security infrastructure information to keep our defense operations, properties, and facilities safe from terrorists, but we must not be overly broad in our definition. My amendment strikes a balance between safeguarding our critical infrastructure, security information, and the public's right to know. Withholding certain information could endanger the public, and to give one example is the case of the Marine Corps Camp Lejeune water contamination tragedy. For 3 decades, thousands of Marines and their families consumed tap water contaminated with chemicals, the likely cause of their cancers. Led by members of Congress, victims and supporters have blamed Marine Corps leadership for hiding the problem and for failing to act. My amendment would prevent another Camp Lejeune from happening. I thank the chairman and ranking member for including it in en bloc number 4. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Washington.
Yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Sanchez.
Gentlelady from
Thank
California.
Thank you, ranking member. There are 3 amendments in this en bloc that I have submitted and that the majority and minority have agreed to. The first one is a report on the Russian nuclear forces. And this amendment requires a report on what the Russians are doing with respect to their nuclear forces in relation to the New START, or the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. It seems to me that there are a lot of, we are told that Russia will be taking a look at and looking at some of its older weapons and probably decommissioning them. And there might be an opportunity in the coming couple of years to maybe bring down the stockpile of nuclear weapons even more, even below some of those limits with respect to the New START treaty. So this report will help to inform Congress on the opportunities and the challenges for further verifiable nuclear weapon reductions, which I believe would strengthen strategic stability, maintain a strong nuclear nonproliferation treaty, as well as enable progress on preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and nuclear bomb-grade materials. I think this is one of the biggest areas where we have a chance to make the world safer. The second amendment that I have on this en bloc is for the Global Threat Reduction Initiative. And I'd like to thank the chairman for including amendment number 135, which would increase funding for Global Threat Reduction Initiative by $20 million. Again, supported by both sides. This also will help to reduce the risk of nuclear terrorism. The danger that nuclear materials or weapons might spread to countries hostile to the United States or to terrorists represents one of the gravest dangers that we have here to the United States. So I believe that non-proliferation programs are critical to our national security and that they must be a top priority. This funding specifically supports securing vulnerable nuclear material around the world in the next 4 years in order to prevent such deadly material from falling into the hands of the terrorists. Again, I believe that non-proliferation programs are the most cost-effective way to achieve these goals, and that's also mirrored in the 9/11 Commission report as well as our Nuclear Posture Commission, which says the urgency arises from the imminent danger of nuclear terrorism if we pass a tipping point in nuclear proliferation. The third amendment that I have in this en bloc is for the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, or this amendment provides for an increase of $2.5 million for the DNFSB. Now, this funding is important because in fiscal year appropriations cut it by nearly 20%. So again, I think these 3 are very important. I thank both the chairman and the ranking member for putting them in this en bloc. Thank you.
Gentleman from California.
Continue to reserve.
We have no further speakers either, so I will yield back our time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Yield back the balance of our time.
Question is on the en bloc amendments offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. McKeon. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to H.Res. 276, I offer amendments en bloc.
Clerk will designate the amendments en bloc.
Amendments on block number 6, consisting of amendments numbered 18, 20, 84, 22, 23, 57, 72, 96, 150, 151, and 149, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. McKeon of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 276, the gentleman from California, Mr. McKeon, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith, will each control 10 minutes, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that amendment number 18 be modified in the form I have placed at the desk.
Clerk will report the modification.
Modification to amendment number...
Dispensed with.
Without objection. Without objection, the amendment is modified. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I urge the committee to adopt the amendments en bloc, all of which have been examined by both the majority and the minority. Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner.
Gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our chairman and ranking member for including amendment number 149 and my ranking member of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, Loretta Sanchez, for joining me in an important amendment. We are deeply concerned about a commercial company, Light Squared, that is developing a communication service that will harm our GPS system and interfere with the military's use of GPS. The military is heavily reliant on GPS. The potential GPS interference would also affect first responders, air traffic management and safety, commercial GPS users. The Deputy Secretary of Defense wrote to the FCC chairman that there is a, quote, strong potential for interference to critical national security systems. We need the Federal Communications Commission to ensure that the Defense Department's concerns about GPS interference are resolved before it moves ahead with the final decision on Light Squared. This is a bipartisan and bicameral concern. The defense bill contains a provision addressing this concern, and the amendment I and my ranking member, Ms. Sanchez, offered strengthens this position by stating that the FCC shall not permit Light Squared operations until the Commission has resolved concerns of widespread harmful interference to GPS devices used by the Department of Defense. I also thank our colleagues on the Energy and Commerce Committee for working with us, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Walls.
Gentleman from
I thank the ranking member and the chairman for their work on this important piece of legislation. In this en bloc amendment, I have an amendment that identified by DOD some important goals in maintaining the operational force of our Reserve and National Guard. These current conflicts have shown the nation the incredible professionalism and the transformation from a strategic reserve to an operational reserve. And the 3 things that DOD identified is ensure that the armed services have access to trained, experienced, and ready Guard forces for missions short of war, capitalize on the gains made in readiness in the reserve component, and ensure the total force is able to sustain commitments around the world utilizing unique skills and capabilities of the reserve component. What this does is gives DOD, and it's a very limited scope of ability, to be able to access under Title 10 those National Guard and Reserve forces for missions short of war at the end of the conflicts or as we wind down these conflicts. My experience with this was after the first Gulf War, as our artillery units and some of them were coming back, in training them, we ended up with no pieces of equipment, ended up taking tape and marking on the floor what a howitzer looked like and using toilet paper rolls as the training aid for that. That is no way to maintain the incredible professionalism that we have in this force. It's no way to use the investment that we've made in this force in the proper manner, and I'm very pleased that the ranking member and the chairman have agreed to put this in. I think it's the right thing to do for our security, and with that I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
I'll reserve the balance for our time.
Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you. We do not have any further speakers, so I will yield myself the balance of our time and simply close the argument, as I believe, if I am correct, this is the last amendment in the process. And I just want to thank Chairman McKeon, his staff, for their outstanding leadership, as has been said many times but cannot be emphasized enough. This committee prides itself on being bipartisan, and Mr. McKeon and his staff have more than upheld that tradition. We appreciate that. We've worked together on a large number of issues, also worked together with members of the Congress, not just on the committee, as we've seen with many of the amendments process. We've been able to include the ideas from great many members, both Republican and Democrat, from across this House, and I feel we have produced an outstanding product as a result. I also want to take a moment to recognize this is the last markup, our last House Defense Bill, we'll be sending with Secretary Gates as our Secretary of Defense. And I want to honor him for his service. He has served 7, maybe 8 presidents, both Republicans and Democrats, has done an outstanding job for this country in all of those roles, and in particular as Secretary of Defense for the last 5 years. His leadership has been outstanding for this country. I'll also note that he is retiring to the state of Washington, so that too shows great judgment on his part. We appreciate, it's been great working with him. He will be missed, and we're excited to start working with the new Secretary of Defense, Mr. Panetta, as soon as he gets confirmed and moves into that role. So I thank the chairman, and I also, I guess I want to conclude by thanking my staff. This is my first time as the ranking member in this committee. It is a great honor that the caucus gave me, and I absolutely could not have gotten it done without the help of the staff that we have on the Armed Services Committee, both minority and majority for that matter. So I thank them for their help and their assistance. I urge support for the bill, and I again thank the chairman. It's been great working with him on this, and with that I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
We have no further speakers, so I also will yield myself the balance of our time. I want to thank my good friend, and you know we use that word a lot around here, but I really feel that Ranking Member Smith is my friend, and we have worked well together on this bill, and I really appreciate his seriousness, the effort that he has put into working his staff. They've done an outstanding job. I want to thank, I also want to echo your remarks about Secretary Gates. Many, many years of outstanding dedication, devotion of service to his nation. I asked him what he was going to do. He said he had a long honey-do list. He was going to be working on that and probably a book. And I also want to welcome Mr. Panetta, Director Panetta, and wish him all the best in confirmation in the Senate. Look forward to working with him here as the new Secretary of Defense. I want to thank Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Thornberry, who has been a great right-hand man through all of this process, as well as all of the subcommittee chairs and ranking members for their hard work at the subcommittee level and then helping out through this whole process. I want to thank our staff director, Bob Simmons, and the minority staff director, Paul Arcangeli. They've been just magnificent through this process, as well as all of the staff here on the floor and those working back in their offices who work so tirelessly on behalf of our troops, the men and women serving throughout the world in various uniforms of the service. At this time, then, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back the balance of our time, encourage all to support the bill, and yield back the balance of my time.
The question is on the en bloc amendments offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. McKeon. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it, and the en bloc amendments are agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in House Report 112-88, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 38 by Mr. Mica of Florida. Amendment number 40 by Mr. Flake of Arizona. Amendment number 42 by Mr. Smith of Washington. Amendment number 43 by Mr. Buchanan of Florida. Amendment number 47 by Mrs. Maloney of New York. Amendment number 48 by Mr. Mack of Florida. Amendment number 49 by Mr. Langevin of Rhode Island. And amendment number 50 by Mr. Amash of Michigan. Amendment number 53 by Mr. Campbell of California. Amendment number 54 also by Mr. Campbell of California. Amendment number 56 by Mr. Chaffetz of Utah. Amendment number 60 by Mr. Polis of Colorado. Amendment number 61 by Mr. Conyers of Michigan. Amendment number 62 by Mr. Flake of Arizona. Amendment number 63 by Mr. Ellison of Minnesota. Amendment number 64 by Ms. Loretta Sanchez of California. Amendment number 111 by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas. Amendment number 148 by Mr. Turner of Ohio. Amendment 152 by Mr. Kravak of Minnesota. and Amendment number 55 by Mr. McGovern of Massachusetts. The Chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 38, printed in House Report 112-88 by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 38, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Micah of Florida.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote followed by 19 2-minute votes.
20 amendments to the Defense Programs Bill awaiting votes, leading up to a vote on final passage. We spoke with a reporter who's been covering all of the amendment debate up late last night and into today. Eugene Malero of Congressional Quarterly. The House continues work on the annual defense authorization bill for a third consecutive day. How's the debate going?
The debate has been quite passionate, especially into Wednesday night when they debated amendments offered by the ranking Democrat of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith, that would require, that would strike language in the bill allowing for the transfer of detainees at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base to be allowed to be transferred into the United States. The Democrats want to take that language out, while the Republicans insist that, that's best for the national security. That amendment, and an amendment that's been going on, that's been debated today, an amendment offered by Democrat Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, that would require the administration to offer a plan for the withdrawal of troops in Afghanistan, has been actually, that debate has been ongoing since the bill was in markup, in full committee markup earlier this month. There's a growing, Democratic bloc. There's actually a growing constituency that is opposed to, a large U.S. presence of troops in Afghanistan ever since, the Navy SEALs captured and killed Osama bin Laden. And now, a political bloc is, gaining momentum to, get out of Afghanistan, reduce troops in Afghanistan. And this is what, the main debate has been going on today.
What about that amendment dealing with defense contractors and their political contributions? What was that amendment about?
That actually was quite a lovely, that was a quite interesting amendment. It stemmed to a draft executive order that the President put together earlier last month, and it was in response to the 2010 Supreme Court decision, the Citizens United versus the FEC, that ruled that corporations and nonprofits have the same free speech rights as individuals do. And the amendment essentially looked to prohibit the companies from disclosing, prohibit the executive agencies from requiring companies to disclose their political contributions, which under this Supreme Court decision they're allowed to do so. Tom Cole, the Republican of Oklahoma, offered the amendment. The amendment was adopted Wednesday night, and Democrats are arguing that it is not in the best interest of the country to allow these companies to not show, where they're putting their political dollars and campaign contributions.
So briefly, at the end of the day, how is the bill going to fare on final passage?
It's supposed, the McGovern amendment on Afghanistan will be, the high-impact one, that and the Adam Smith on Guantanamo Bay detainees. So final passage, we're expecting the bill to gain enough support to be sent to the Senate. However, a lot of observers are unclear how the the House is going to vote on this McGovern amendment on Afghanistan. But once it's in the Senate, Carl Levin's committee will most likely do away, strip some of the provisions that are very controversial in the House version, including a policy measure that would put restrictions on the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I can totally see the Senate, scaling back on that, and also doing their own version of some Afghanistan language.
Eugene Malero of Congressional Quarterly. Thank you.
Thank you.
To the hurdles the House Defense Bill may have in the Senate, the White House has issued a veto threat on several provisions in the bill. The Military Times writing that President Obama's advisors will recommend a veto over limitations on the development of a main engine for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, a move the administration sees as a way to possibly keep alive an alternative engine that the White House has been trying to cancel. A veto threat is also threatened over provisions involving the implementation of the New START treaty with Russia. White House officials say one provision would prevent the dismantling of nuclear weapons that are in excess of military needs, and that a second encroached on presidential authority to set policy for nuclear weapons. So the House continuing now to vote on the first of 20 amendments, and this amendment offered by Representative John Mica of Florida. It would change the rules of engagement for U.S. service members assigned to duty in hostile fire area. The amendment would ensure service members have the right to bear arms and the authority to defend themselves from hostile actions. That's an amendment from Representative Mica. House Republicans a short time ago held a press conference about jobs and the economy. We're going to watch that during this vote.
Good morning, everyone. Since the moment the American people entrusted us with the majority, our focus has been on job creation. Americans continue to look at all the stimulus spending that was enacted under the current administration and asking the question, well, then, where are the jobs? Our focus in the House since January has been passing reforms that would take a different approach, policies aimed at creating an environment for long-term job growth. It starts with the Pledge to America, which focused on helping small businesses create jobs and reining in our massive debt that is hurting economic growth. And so far this year, we've kept our pledge by passing legislation to ease the regulatory burden, expand American energy production, repeal the job-crushing health care law, and many more. Unfortunately, rather than joining Republicans in focusing on policies that create jobs and promote economic growth, the Democrats who control Washington continue to propose higher taxes, more stimulus spending, and even more regulations. That's a recipe for economic uncertainty for private sector job creators, and it won't help families and small businesses who are struggling to make ends meet. So I used to be a small businessman before I got into this. I know what it takes to create jobs and to meet a payroll. And I know that every tax dollar the government takes is a dollar that Americans are unable to invest in their family, their business, or our economy. So today, we are unveiling a plan for America's job creators that's focused on creating lasting economic growth and job creation. It builds on our Pledge to America and the legislative action that we're already taking this year to create jobs, which the Democrats continue to block. It'll remove government obstacles to private sector growth, the kind of real economic growth that the Obama stimulus proposed, but failed to deliver. The truth is we'll never balance our budget and rid our children of debt until we cut spending and have real economic growth. That's why both House and Senate Republicans are focused on creating a better environment for private sector job creation. Helping Americans get back to work is our #1 priority. We're going to do everything we can to help create jobs and to boost our economy. With that, let me turn it over to Mr. Cantor.
Speaker, good morning. we've been focused as a House Republicans since day one on jobs and the economy. And that's day one, not just this session, but going back to January of '09. It was then our focus to make sure we're doing all we can to promote economic recovery. Several of the chairmen that are with us today were ranking members, including Mr. Camp, Mr. Brady, and others, as well as then Minority Leader Boehner and I's whip said we need to focus on jobs and the economy. But then for 2 years, Speaker Pelosi and the Democratic majority did it their way. They passed a nearly $1 trillion stimulus bill, which failed to get people back to work. They insisted on passing their nearly $1 trillion health care overhaul that the public still does not support, and they repeatedly tried to impose the largest tax increase in American history. The fact is, they did not focus on jobs, and that's why we saw the outcome of the November '10 election, is that people were tired of the lack of results and the lack of focus on the important issue of the economy. And that's why when we were in the minority last year and we put out the Pledge to America, that we were actually going to focus on what people cared about, which was getting Americans back to work. And in our Pledge to America, we said we were going to adopt a two-prong approach. The first was to get the fiscal house in order. We have been about that, as you know, in passing the Ryan budget, which puts a plan out there, which provides a concrete proposal to reduce spending in Washington and to change the culture once and for all. But we also said it's not just about cutting, that you also need to grow the economy. And so we understand that it's important for us, in order to grow the economy, not just to see Washington grow, but to see small businesses flourish. And now more than ever, our nation needs small businesses and entrepreneurs to get people back to work. That's why we are presenting today America's Plan for Job Creators. This is where our economic activity is going to flourish, and this is what we want to do, to continue to build on the Pledge to America and all the work that our chairman and committees have been doing over the last 5 months to make sure that our nation's job creators have an economy in which they can start hiring again. We are focusing on jobs, and you'll hear the details from our chairman as to what they've been doing and what they're planning to do. The bottom line is this, that this represents a real contrast. There is a choice in which the American public will see. We have a spending reduction plan in the Ryan budget. It's clear the President, former Speaker Pelosi, and the Democratic leader in the Senate, Reid, do not have a spending plan. We have a growth plan. They do not. We are focused on the economy and jobs, have been so since day one, and Leader Reid, Leader Pelosi, and the President are not. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Chairman Hinchling.
Thank you, Leader. This morning we had a confirmation that the economy grew at a tepid 1.8% in the last quarter. This confirms yet again that the Obama recovery is the weakest we've had in the post-war era. It is 10 times weaker than the weakest recovery dating back to 1973 as measured by the pre-recession peak. The Obama recovery continues to fail, and the American people continue to suffer. In the 5th Congressional District of Texas that I am proud to represent, there are so many of my constituents who have friends, family members, neighbors who remain unemployed and do not have the hope the President promised. All the President and congressional Democrats have delivered is a stimulus plan that just last week the latest study showed cost the American people with interest $1.2 trillion and helped destroy or forestall 1 million private sector jobs. That's not exactly a bargain the American people wanted. The President and congressional Democrats still have not realized that they cannot spend, tax, borrow, and bail out their way into economic prosperity. But House Republicans know you can't grow your way into economic prosperity. You can grow your way into jobs. And that's why we're presenting the House Republican plan for America's job creators. Every week under the leadership of our Speaker and our leader, we have brought measures to the House floor to, number one, deal with one of the greatest impediments we have to job creation today, and that is the uncertainty provided by this administration and by the previous Democratic-controlled Congress, whether it be the perpetual bailout of Wall Street, Obamacare, my latest favorite, the EPA now wants dairy farmers to file emergency plans to deal with spilled milk. As one farmer said, I'll just call up the kitty. It is bureaucrats gone wild. House Republicans know it is time to balance the regulatory burden against the unemployment burden. It is time to ensure that our tax code is competitive with our competitors. It is time that our job creators quit paying almost $4 a gallon for their gasoline. It is about empowerment. It is about confidence. This will create jobs. This is the Republican solution, and I'm proud to be a part of our House Republican plan for America's job creators. And now the Vice Chairman of our conference, Kathy McMorris Rogers of Washington.
Since the founding of America, every generation has expanded opportunities for their children and grandchildren. And yet all across this country right now, Americans question whether or not their children and grandchildren are going to have the same opportunities that they've enjoyed. And what's driving that whole question is the uncertainty. America's had a strong foundation from which innovation, ingenuity, opportunity has taken place. But we can't take for granted that that's just going to continue. And the policies that come out of the Congress make a big difference, whether or not we are competitive. According to the Index for Economic Freedom, America continues to slip in competitiveness. And it's driven by the regulatory climate, what our tax code is, energy prices. All of that contributes to whether or not we are competitive, whether or not our job creators can create jobs, whether or not we have those opportunities for the next generation. I, too, am proud to endorse the plan to create jobs. This is what America needs. This is how we create opportunities for the next generation.
Thank you. Dave Camp. Obviously, our tax code is broken. It's too complex, it's too costly, it's too burdensome for families and small business owners. And any job creation starts with a growing economy, and that means that we need fundamental tax reform. We need to have a comprehensive tax reform. We're looking at a proposal that will mean that there's a 25% tax rate as we look at the various deductions, loopholes, tax expenditures, preferences, whatever you want to call them. It's very important that we address that. And then there's also this question of uncertainty. We have large chunks of our tax code that expire periodically every year, and a big chunk expiring in 2012. Independent economists have said if we look at this fundamental tax reform that we're proposing, combined with the spending cuts that are in our path to prosperity, that we create 1 million jobs in the first year alone. Another critical piece to growing the economy and creating jobs is a vibrant export agenda. We need to move the 3 pending trade agreements. The independent International Trade Commission says that if we move those 3 agreements, 250,000 jobs will be created. And that's going to be a big part of our agenda. And now I'd like to introduce my friend and chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Fred Upton.
You know, everything that we're doing in energy and commerce is related to jobs. 10 years ago, the U.S. economy was 3 times the size of China. 5 years from now, China's economy will exceed that of the United States. So obviously, we need to focus on jobs. Americans understand about supply and demand and oil prices. Next month, we in our committee are going to move the Keystone Pipeline bill, which will be one of the largest construction projects ever conducted in the United States. 20,000 jobs minimum. We're talking about moving as much as 1 million barrels per day from Canada, from the oil sands in Alberta down to the lower 48. And we know that if we don't do it, China will. Alaska. We had a subcommittee markup earlier this week. Shell Oil has spent more than $3 billion trying to develop 2 test wells off the coast of Alaska where they believe that there's as much as 25 billion barrels underneath. It's been stymied for a couple of years. We're going to move that legislation to the House floor next month, and it'll be out of full committee next month as well. On the regulatory front, we had a subcommittee markup this week on the Train Act, that is requiring the EPA to do a study on the economic analysis on all the regulations they have before them. Already we made some progress in that the EPA backed off on the boiler regs and the cement regs. This bill on the Train Act is going to move through a committee next week or next month, and I think it'll be a good issue for us as we look at all the regulations impacting businesses and jobs. Net neutrality. We had that debate earlier this year in the Congress. You know, we know thousands of jobs have been created by the Internet, all without regulatory overview. Yet the FCC is trying to impose new regulations that will stymie the growth of the Internet. Greenhouse gases. We had that legislation passed the House by nearly 80-90 votes. In the Senate, we had at least 64 U.S. senators that voted for a minimum of a two-year delay. Greenhouse gases impact every sector, every sector of the manufacturing side of our economy. We know that, in fact, if those regs are allowed to move forward, it'll cost us perhaps as many as 1 million jobs. We're working together on a bipartisan basis and a bicameral basis to see if we can't slow a halt to some of these regulations that they were unable to legislate that they now are trying to regulate. Next is Lamar Smith, the chairman of the powerful Judiciary Committee. Ever so powerful.
Thank you, Fred. Well, apparently the Democrats still think that increasing taxes is going to create jobs. But I'm not aware of any time in American history where that has worked. On the other side, Republicans and those of us on the Judiciary Committee have come up with any number of ways to create jobs. First, we can put a check on the burdensome regulations that steal jobs and cost employers billions of dollars. The REINS Act requires Congress to approve the most onerous regulations. The Judiciary Committee has also passed a patent reform bill that enables better patents to be approved more quickly and that also protects intellectual property. This will create many thousands of new jobs. America must also attract more skilled workers from abroad, both to start businesses and to keep our high-tech companies competitive with other companies across the world. That means more H-1B visas, and this, too, is a guaranteed job generator. So on one side, there are higher taxes, and on the other side, a check on regulations, better patents, and more skilled workers. The Judiciary Committee not only protects the Constitution, we create jobs. And I think Kevin Brady of Texas is up next.
I'm just eye candy.
I'm not. My name is Reed Ribble, and I represent Wisconsin's 8th Congressional District. I am a new freshman member, and one of my passions as a former business owner, I ran a commercial roofing company for 3 decades, was this very topic. We need to address jobs in this country. If we can take somebody who's now receiving an unemployment check and help them get a paycheck instead, you will close the gap on revenue faster than anything we can do. There's been a lot of talk in the media and from the other side of the aisle that we need to raise taxes. We don't need to raise taxes to increase revenue. We need to raise up taxpayers. And you do that by creating jobs. And so I've been focused on this in my short career here. I started a caucus of freshman members of Congress who are business leaders in their own community, and you're going to hear a little bit from them today. But here's what I believe that business owners and job creators in this country really need. First, they need confidence. We need consumers that are confident that if they spend money today, that they will still have a job tomorrow. And business owners need to be confident that if they expand their business today, consumers will be there tomorrow. The second thing they need is access to capital. And bad regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. have forced small and medium-sized banks in my district to restrict capital. Entrepreneurs and small business owners and startups need capital first and foremost to expand their businesses and create jobs because that's where jobs come from. And then the last thing they need is they need certainty. They can't rely, if they cannot rely on a federal regulation or a patent to come through in time, jobs can't be created. I'll tell you one example. Miller Electric Company is in Appleton, Wisconsin, the town that...
The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment number 40, printed in House Report 112-88 by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, on which further proceedings were postponed and in which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 40, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of taking a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote, and the chair would remind members there are 18 more 2-minute votes and would appreciate the members' courtesy by staying close to the chamber. The first of 19 2-minute votes.
Amendment voting continues in the House. A quick rundown of some of the provisions in the Defense Programs Bill. It authorizes $119 billion for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It also allows the purchase of 32 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters and the development of a second engine for the planes. The bill increases the missile defense program and bars Guantanamo Bay detainees from coming into the U.S.
Members of the chamber, would you vote? Members of the chamber, would you change their vote? The ayes are 200.
Stations are open.
Mr. Kingston. Mr. Kingston votes aye. Mr. Backus. Mr. Backus votes aye. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes aye. Mr. Garamendi. Mr. Garamendi votes no. Mr. Kaufman of Colorado. Mr. Kaufman of Colorado votes aye. Ms. Pelosi. Ms. Pelosi votes no.
On this question, the ayes are 246, the nays are 172, and the amendment is agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 42, printed in House Report 112-88 by the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith, on which further proceedings were postponed and which the noes prevailed by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 42, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Smith of Washington.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of taking the vote by a recorded vote will rise until counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote, followed by 17 other 2-minute votes, and the chair would ask members not to leave the chamber.
This amendment vote, offered by Representative Adam Smith of Washington, a Democrat, it would allow the transfer of detainees to the U.S. to testify in federal court and remove language barring the transfer of detainees held abroad to the U.S. The Senate is working toward a final vote on extending provisions of the Patriot Act that expire at the end of today. Earlier, the Senate voted 78 to 18 to move the extensions forward. A further debate on amendments and the extension could happen later today in the Senate. Once the Senate approves it, the House will need to vote on it so the bill can be flown to Europe for the President's signature. The Associated Press writing that the legislation would extend for 4 years provisions that allow law enforcement officials to set roving wiretaps to monitor multiple communications devices, obtain court-approved access to business records and other documents, including library checkouts, and conduct surveillance of lone wolf suspects not known to be tied to specific terrorist groups.
All members vote. 65, the nays are 253. The amendment is not agreed to. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 43, printed in House Report 112-88 by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Buchanan, on which further proceedings were postponed and in which the noes prevailed by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 43, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Buchanan. Amendment number 43, printed in House Report number 112-88, offered by Mr. Buchanan of Florida.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of a recorded vote will rise to be counted. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
This amendment offered by Representative Buchanan of Florida. A little bit more about the USA Patriot Act from the National Journal. titled Patriot Games. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky is still not agreeing to an expedited vote on a bill reauthorizing 3 Patriot Act provisions for 4 years. A potential deal that would have given him votes on 2 amendments fell through, due, Paul said, to opposition to GOP leaders. Without a deal, final passage of the bill will come at 7 a.m. on Friday, allowing investigative authorities to lapse for 7 hours, a circumstance administration officials claim could cause danger.
There are 240.